the book of Judges never seems to disappoint with another crazy story. And so we read about Gideon and Gideon's sons, well, one of his sons, Abimelech. And in verses 1-6, Gideon's son Abimelech, he convinced the people of Shechem that it would be better for him to rule over them. He said, I am from here. Isn't it better that I rule over you? And so remember, Shechem is a place where a lot of sadness has happened. It's where Dinah was raped. And so every time I hear the town Shechem, I just think about sad things happening here. And so when we read about, Abimelech, he's telling them, remember, I'm your flesh and blood. And this is in verse 2. And then when, everyone talked about it all over the town, they said he is related to us. They gave him money and silver from the temple of Baal, the false god. And Abimelech hired, it said, reckless scoundrels in the NIV version in verse 4. And they followed him. These are people of no standards, no morals. Now remember, this is Gideon's son. But Gideon had this son with one of his maidservants. And so when we read things about the Bible, now I didn't read this anywhere online. I'm just supposing in my head. So I don't know if you have any comments as to what I'm about to say. Let me know in the comments. But Abimelech had this child with a maidservant. And so when people see things in the Bible, even if you think about Jacob, how he had many, concubines. He had Rachel, he had Leah, and then he had 2 concubines. I mean, marriage is such a sacred thing. God wants us to be married to one person, right? That's it. And so when people see things in the Bible and they say, oh, well, Jacob had many wives, so, God supports polygamy. No, like the Bible is also restating things that happened. It's telling a story. And there are some things that God commands us to do. And there's some things that we read about that other people have done, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should do them. So I was just it's interesting that the person that Gideon ended up having a child with, that was a maidservant, not necessarily a union with one person. And this is what ended up happening with this one child. Just went astray, ended up killing all of his brothers. There's 70 of them, 70. He killed all of them except for one, Jotham. And Jotham was smart enough to keep his distance. When they told him that he was wanting to be king, he went up to the top of a mountain and shouted, and this is in verse 7. He said, listen. And he gave some analogies, and he spoke in Proverbs talking about an olive tree and a fig tree, fruit-bearing trees. And they said, come to be our king. And the vine answered, no, I won't do that. But then with the thorn bush, the thorn bush said, let me be king, and I think it says something like, I will give you shade in verse 15. And that is such a strange thing. A thorn bush cannot provide shade, right? But the people are so blind to Abimelech, like they didn't even think, okay, well, this person just slaughtered their own flesh and blood, 70 of them. Why should they be king? They weren't thinking logically. I think Israel so desperately wanted a king. And so Jotham basically cursed them. He said in verse 20, if you let Abimelech be your king, then it says, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from you, and consume Abimelech. And then Jotham fled. It says, he escaped in verse 21 because he was afraid of his brother, and rightly so. I mean, if Abimelech heard what he said and then found him, he would have killed him for sure. He killed all of his other brothers. And we don't hear of Jotham ever again in the entire Bible. We have no idea what happened to Jotham. He went into hiding because of his estranged brother. And so we hear about, Gal, son of Ebed. He moved with his clan to Shechem. And these are the people, he started talking to the people who helped Abimelech kill his brothers. And it says specifically, that Abimelech had ruled for 3 years. And while these people were out in the fields and drinking, they said to themselves, why should we honor Abimelech? in verse 29, if only this people were under my command, then I would get rid of him. I would say to Abimelech, call out your whole army. And so when the governor heard this, he told Abimelech, and Abimelech was upset, and Abimelech attacked with his troops. It says in verse 34, so Abimelech and all his troops set out by night and took up concealed positions near Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gal, son of Ebed, had gone out and was standing at the entrance of the city gate, just as Abimelech and his troops came out from their hiding place. So he attacked them and he slaughtered. I mean, he killed women and children. He was ruthless. And remember, these are the same people that were behind Abimelech in the beginning. You know, they supported him, they killed. And, you know, if you're helping someone do something bad, what makes you think that they won't turn and do that to you? And I think that's just a testament in a very extreme way that I understand, but it's definitely a testament to being mindful of the company you keep, the people that you keep close to you. If you're around people and they're constantly gossiping or bringing gossip to you, what do you think that they're doing about you? They're talking about you. Best believe they're talking about you and they are gossiping about you, because what someone is doing, if you see them behaving in a certain way, then what makes you think that they won't do that to you? And so it's very important. Now, I'm not saying to avoid people who, you know, avoid everyone, and, you know, we should be able to live in the world but not be of it, but just be mindful of the people you keep close to you and the people that you truly trust, because Abimelech slaughtered them. I think there was one instance where there was a tower and he killed even like the women and the children. I mean, I don't understand that. He's ruthless, selfish person, even to death. And we'll talk about that in a second. Anyways, let me get back to my notes. It says verse 26 through 29. We talked about that already. Verses 34 through 50. Abimelech destroys the city and the same people that helped him kill his brothers. How ironic. And then in verses 50 through 55, Abimelech went to attack another tower, but a woman threw a stone on his head. And who does that remind you of? Does that not remind you of the story with Jael and how she killed the king? She said, no, come sleep. You know, you can come rest in this tent. And she ended up killing him. A woman saves the day. So she threw a millstone on his head. And as he was dying, because he has such a huge ego, this man, he said to his armor bearer, draw your sword. And this is verse 54. Draw your sword and kill me so that they can't say a woman killed him. So his servant did that. And what's so funny is that in the Bible, it clearly says a woman kills him. So, I mean, it's known that he was killed by a woman anyway. So he ended up getting stabbed, you know, just quicken the death, I guess. But at any rate, he is just so selfish and egotistical, even to death. And the end of the chapter says, thus God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also made the people of Shechem pay for all their wickedness. The curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came on them. One thing that I learned from this chapter too is that revenge is for God. If you feel wronged by something, if you feel like someone has done something to you, leave it to God to deal with them, you know, or even if you feel like someone can learn a lesson from something that they did to you, let God deal with them. God is much better at dealing with people and give revenge to God. It said that Abimelech ruled for 3 years. You know, maybe Jotham was thinking, you know, where's God in all this? Abimelech is ruling and nothing is happening for 3 years. That's a substantial amount of time, in my opinion, if you're waiting for God to bring revenge on something. Even if you think about Joseph, he was in prison wrongfully for 2 years, you know, while he was just waiting for God. And so sometimes waiting for God can feel endless. Like, God, when are you going to do this? You said you were going to do this, but when? But we just have to remember that revenge is for the Lord. But not only that, the timing is all up to him. He knows best. Let's just continue to trust him and trust that he knows what's best for us and not rush anything. These people ended up slaughtering themselves, you know, basically. So yeah, that was this chapter. Next week, we will read about Judges chapter 10. But let me know what you learned. I post a new Bible study video on Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 a.m. Eastern, and I can't wait to study the Bible with you again. Bye.